Has Maine gone mad? Maine's Department of Education is about to pass a rule that lets school counselors and social workers take children away from their parents. The radical Chapter 117 will separate children from their families if they don't surrender to the gender identity madness. It lets schools conspire to keep parents in the dark about a child's gender transition. It even lets schools administer experimental shots like puberty blockers and synthetic hormones without parents ever finding out. And if you dare object to this, you lose your kids.
If I go to any normal average person, I said, what do you think safe means for a child? If a child feels unsafe, they're going to say, well, they're abused, they're not being taken care of, they have no food, that type of thing. But the way the transgender cult defines it is if the parents don't affirm them, now the children are unsafe. And the parents are the one that's abusive. And the school is a safe place. This is why everything we read is about safety, 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 abuse, neglect, that type of thing. They keep dripping these words and they're redefining it so that eventually the goal is to separate the child from the parents.
Is school where your child goes to be educated or indoctrinated? Today, I bring you another important report about the radical gender ideology that keeps popping up in schools across North America. Drea Humphrey here with Rebel News, and today I bring you a sit-down interview with Mr. Alvin Louie. Alvin is the president of an organization called Courage is a Habit. Courage is a Habit provides parents with tools and strategies to fight the indoctrination of their children in schools. And of particular concern to Courage is a Habit is Chapter 117, which will soon be voted on by the District of Education for the state of Maine. Now, if you go to courageisahabit.org, you can see, according to them, if this chapter were to pass, it would allow schools in Maine to expand their powers and set the foundation for school counselors and social workers to further separate children from their families. That would include extreme measures such as being able to provide puberty blockers or bondage tools for their body parts to help further their belief that they were born in the wrong body without their parents' consent or knowledge. Now, if you watch this report in full, you'll see I've reached out to the District of Education for Maine to bring you their side of the story, so you have to wait to see what they said if they give an answer. And before I get to this important interview with Alvin about what potentially is going to go down soon in Maine, you should know that at Rebel News, our promise to you is that we bring you the other side of the story that the legacy mainstream media tends to ignore. So if you appreciate that and you want to help us keep the lights on so we can bring you these important reports, consider being the first to be in the know by subscribing to our website at rebelnewsplus.com. There, you will get our exclusive content, including exclusive documentaries and shows, and you will help support our independent journalism. Here is Mr. Louie.
And joining us now is Alvin Louie, the president of Courage is a Habit. Thanks so much, Alvin, for being on Rebel News today.
Thank you for having me, Dre. I really appreciate it. Nice to meet you.
Now, you guys put a little quick video together, just letting people know, parents, of course, in Maine, what is going on when it comes to Chapter 117. And I got to tell you, as a journalist out in Canada, I thought this is an issue that many parents across North America are going to want to know more about. So why don't you start off just briefly explaining what is Chapter 117?
So in Maine, this is a rule that allows the expansion of school counselors and social workers the power to further erode parental rights. And more specifically, they can work with outside agencies for clinical and non-clinical treatments and keep it from parents under the guise of safety, of course. And I'll talk a little bit about that in terms of the school counselors and social worker and the whole mental health Trojan horse. But specifically to 117, it allows school counselors and social workers to be able to do things like provide chest binders and tucking and recommend hormone blockers to kids, using an outside agency without telling parents. And of course, that doesn't cover the gateway to all this, which is pronouns, name changes, clothing changes. name all those different things, are the gateway to this social contagion. And so that allows them to keep it from parents. Should this pass, doesn't mean that parents can't fight it, but it certainly makes it more difficult, and it emboldens them to do that, which is why we're pushing for waking up parents in Maine, and to get their voices heard and to fight back before it cements in Maine.
Yeah, if people want more exact information on that particular chapter, they can go to your website, which I'll go ahead and link in this written report in the description box below. There's 2 sections in particular you guys are obviously concerned about. I'm not sure if you're familiar with SOGI 123. It's a curriculum out in parts of Canada, in particular my province, British Columbia and Alberta.
Okay.
And there's a lot of that already happening. It's sort of a fluid curriculum. And in particular, the teachers are told, if a child is trans identified, you are not supposed to tell their parents. So it sounds like that's kind of what's happening here. And then you're saying it's happening under sort of the guise of safety. Why don't you touch on that a little bit?
So if you can redefine words, you don't have to change the law. And one of the greatest weapons for the transgender cult and this woke ideology that's this commandeering public education is that they are very good at language contamination. And the 2 words that school counselors and this mental health craze that it's bleeding through everything's emotions, everything's mental health, is that they're redefining 2 words. And this is very important for all parents to understand. And those 2 words are safety and abuse. Safe and abuse. If I go to any normal average person, I said, what do you think safe means for a child? If a child feels unsafe, they're going to say, well, they're abused, they're not being taken care of, they have no food, that type of thing. But the way the transgender cult defines it is if the parents don't affirm them, now the children are unsafe. And the parents are the one that's abusive. And the school is a safe place. This is why everything we read is about safety, 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 abuse, neglect, that type of thing. They keep dripping these words and they're redefining it so that eventually the goal is to separate the child from the parents. And they put this social contagion on children, things like pronouns and name changes. And they know that 99% of parents are not going to be good with that. We know there's no such thing as a trans child. We know that children are perfect the way they are. And when they put this on children, it is for almost 99% certainty that parents will go, wait a minute, I know my child. What are you guys doing? They're not different sex. And as soon as they say that, they're unsafe. And that's how they're building these policies on that foundation. And they'll come in as mental health. They'll say there are children who need help. There are children who are abused. So these things help the children who are abused. We can't tell the parents. But what they don't tell you, the misdirection here is that schools, and I'm sure even in Canada, have always been a safe place for children. We've always had programs that help kids who are abused, but on an individual basis. You call the authorities or you call Child Protective Services, or what the version is in Canada, and then they come in and do an honest investigation. But that's not what they're doing today. They're doing a blanket and say, we decide what's safe. We decide what's abusive. And of course, it's all through the lens of this gender ideology.
Well, I know in lots of the reports I've done, and I know you guys have in the US a activist, a young girl. She's only 18 years old who's detransitioning. Her name is Chloe.
She's
and
wonderful.
She's been going out just explaining what I've heard a lot, which is that parents, when they're faced with rapid gender dysphoria, meaning your child hasn't felt like they were in the wrong body their whole life, they go to school and all of a sudden they do. She, like others I've spoken to, was told, or her parents were told this. Let's take a look.
At 13 years old, on the advice of so-called medical professionals, I was put on puberty-blocking medication. And only a month later, I was given my first testosterone injection. The gender clinic presented my parents with the classic false dichotomy regarding children with gender dysphoria. Would you rather have a dead daughter or a living son?
So is that what we're talking about here? Is it more linked to suicide, or you're not sure?
No, there's no independent evidence, not one shred, that says if you don't affirm a child that they're going to kill themselves. These studies are done by their own people. And so there's no shred of evidence that says that. And in fact, I'll give your readers or listeners two things. I'll give you kind of a mindset strategy, and then I'll give you some hard data that you can go pull. From a mindset strategy, literally in the history of parenting, we have never used this as a marker for what they want and don't want. Can you imagine if we said that about anything else? Well, if I don't let my daughter get that tattoo, she's going to kill herself. Well, if I don't let my 15-year-old run away with that 35-year-old man, she's going to kill herself. We don't do that with anything else in parenting. And not only is this scientifically untrue, it's morally and common sense untrue. We are now teaching a generation of kids, even if they don't get wrapped up in this transgender poison, to say, oh, if I want something, I just gotta say I gotta kill myself. Think about the precedents that we're setting, right? That say if a child wants something and you say no, they just gotta say I'm gonna kill myself. And so so from a common sense and a strategy standpoint, I urge parents to ignore it, completely ignore this emotional, manipulative blackmail. It is not true. In fact, the opposite is true. If you step away from the emotional blackmail, when you're pumping children with confusion and anxiety and telling them they're in the wrong body, that's what gets them to kill themselves. Because now they've done things to their body. So now they're 25 realizing I made a decision at 15 years old that changed my whole life. And now my whole life, I can't breastfeed. Even if you detransition, your voice is changed forever. You got health issues. So that is from a common sense standpoint, is purely emotional blackmail. I urge every parent to look past it, ignore it. It's to shut you down as parents so that they can continue indoctrinating your children. From a technical standpoint, if you go to courageisahabit.org under tools, there is a wonderful study, a real study done by Heritage, and they completely destroy the suicide myth. This is not true. And so you can read that and arm yourself with that knowledge. But even the people that scream they're going to kill themselves actually have no data. They just scream that at you, hoping that, and it works. A lot of parents shut down. But if you actually sit down and say, show me that data, show me an independent study, where are you getting that? They don't have it because that's not true. But what they do, though, is that they throw this, they put the social contagion on children at school, 7 hours a day, 12 years. And by the time they get to be, 12, 13 years old, they believe what they've been brainwashed to, and then they believe the parents are the ones who are unsafe.
Well, you made a statement. You said we know that children are not transgender, but there are children who are identifying this way, whether or not, they learned that from their environment, and the very, very rare that have had that, since they were younger. How do you think they should be treated or approached in schools?
Well, first of all, that was so minuscule that was almost percentage zero when it comes to children, because there's always going to be outliers. There's always outliers for every mental issue. And my answer to that is we treat those tiny 0.01%, those children, like we do every other issue. We treat it on the individual basis. Is it something mental? Are they going through something? Is it something in the other underlying conditions? Today, even with all this social contagion, over 30% of kids identify as transgender have some form of autism. And the other percent that don't have autism have underlying issues, whether it be bulimia, high anxiety, OCD, all kinds of other issues. But instead of treating the individual underlying issue, these school counselors and these teachers and these activists that have taken over public education are now moving them into the transgender cult. And so you never treat the underlying condition. All you're doing is putting this on them. And then now they think, oh, I don't have to deal with my issue. Mm-hmm. I just say I identify as a different pronoun, and I get love bombed. I get love bombed online. I get love bombed in school, and then that endorse, right? You get that immediate spike of love bombing and those endorphins, and then you feel accepted, and you feel seen, and you feel loved, and it's so much easier to just lean into that than to deal with whatever your underlying issue is. But the problem with that is that eventually that fades. Okay, they're calling you a different pronoun. Now you need more. Now you need chest binding, tucking, and then you get another increased shot of love bombing. And that's what you keep moving these kids through.
Now, you guys just had your midterm elections. Do you think the outcome of what happened there for Maine in any way will affect what is likely to happen in this vote for the school board?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, certainly, from a state and local standpoint, like for governors and different seats like that, it depends on who you talk to. Some people think it went well, some people think it didn't. As far as the school education go, there was a lot of seats that were flipped. And I know that if it wasn't for the push that we've had the last, 2-3 years, that largely parents would still be unaware and the school boards would have gotten worse and worse. We turned over a lot of different seats. There's been a lot of great work done. People who don't even know who the mayor was a few years ago ran for school board because they realized that if you don't care about politics, politics is coming after your children. So I was very, very happy to see the wins that we've had on the school board. I keep reminding people here in the U.S. that this indoctrination has been slowly working through its way through K through 12 for the last 20, 25 years, with the last 7 or 8 years really reaching its saturation. And so in the last 2 or 3 years, we've taken a big chunk out of that machine. And now people are always looking at the things that we didn't get done. But what I look at is if you spend 20, 25 years doing something and someone else spends 2 to 3 years taking a big chunk out of it already, that's very promising to me.
My province, British Columbia, just had its municipal elections in October, and I saw the same thing. I interviewed quite a few people for the first time running as school trustees for the same reasons you're talking about. Many of them were against the books that are sexualizing children in school. Your website has a lot of resources for those who are concerned parents in Maine. Let's take a look at one of the school board members and social workers who was definitely supporting or is supporting Chapter 117 about one of those very books right now.
So I think one of the things that I both personally and professionally am struggling with, and I so appreciate all this information, but the piece that I think folks get really hung up on are the piece around images. And I think about the book Genderqueer, which is a book that I personally love. It's in my bookshelf behind me. So you know that there's one or maybe even 2 images that, if taken out of context, they raise eyebrows and they're really easy to get families concerned. The image I'm thinking about is an image where there's a depiction of oral sex happening. If this were ripped from the pages of any number of adult magazines, it would be immediately stamped porn and moved out of there. And so for me, I think what I'm needing from my allies is talking points and responses to that piece around the image and the graphic either depiction of the sexual encounter or the picture of the sexual encounter. And I've scripted stuff around the context matters and the motivation matters. But in a public forum, folks want us as members and as social workers and healthcare providers to be on their recording camera saying that we support pornography in school.
All right. Well, thank you, Alvin. Like I said, I know that our Rebel viewers across the world will be very interested and concerned about what's going on there. And we'll keep in touch about what actually happens in the vote. Tell everybody really quick where they can go to find out how to take action if they are in Maine.
Absolutely. If you go to courageishabit.org, we actually have a section dedicated to Maine. It tells you what 117 is. It links you to the bill itself. And we have the video that you mentioned earlier. We also expose a couple of a school counselor and a school counselor and a school board member who's also a social worker. And these are the kind of people that are pushing this in Maine. As far as the rest of the U.S. and the rest of the, for your readers that are outside of Maine, Courage is a Habit. You go to courageishabit.org. Has a lot of different tools that are made for parents. We do not just point out the problem, we make tools and strategies for the average parent. So just go to courageishabit.org, whether you're in Maine or not. And you can also follow us on our socials. All our socials are at Courage Habit.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So let me know what you think about Chapter 117, and is this happening in school districts in your area? I reached out to the District of Education for Maine, and at this very moment, I have not heard back from them. But if I do in a timely manner, I will go ahead and put an update in the written article for this report. You can find the written article for this report by clicking on the description box below. I'm Drea Humphrey, and this is Rebel News. If you want to stay in the know from a news organization you can trust to bring you the other side of the story, subscribe to our exclusive content at rebelnewsplus.com.